Welcome, everybody. Well, thank you for joining us tonight. It is so. I'm Catherine Nelson. I'm a member of the Board of Trustees of the library. Before we start the program tonight, I just want to point out a few of our upcoming events that you might be interested in. Tomorrow night, Jennifer Breedbo is speaking about her new mystery, Murder Will Out. Next Tuesday, the 14th, Judy Taylor, who many of you know is a local artist, is speaking on Masters of the Gilded Age. Should be very interesting. The Tuesday after that, July 21st, Christina Baker Klein is talking about her new book, The Foursome, which just came out in May to very good reviews. And on Thursday, July 23rd, we have another Kneisel Hall performance. That'll be over in St. John's. I'm sure many of you have attended this before. It's young chamber musicians who are spending the summer in Blue Hill at Kneisel Hall come and perform over here every summer. And they are amazing young musicians, and the performance is always just really a very special event. So you may be interested in that. And most importantly, I want to point out that this weekend is our giant used book sale. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. It'll be here in the library. So I hope you all turn out and purchase lots of books. It's not purchase, it's by donation, but I hope you will pick up a lot of books from the library and make a donation. We rely on all of our patrons, all of our individuals who come into the library for donations. The town, as many of you know, provides about 10% of our operating expenses each year. Everything else comes from individual donations. So please come out and support the used book sale this weekend. Then I would like to introduce tonight's speaker. I'm delighted to introduce Tom Ricks again. He was here with us last year along with Lincoln. Tom is an author and journalist who spent much of his career focusing on military and national security issues. He wrote for both the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post. He's a two-time winner of the Pulitzer Prize for National Reporting. The first time in 2000, he was a member of the Journal's team that wrote The Price of Power about changes in U.S. defense spending post-Cold War. His second Pulitzer was awarded in 2002 as a member of the Post's team reporting on U.S. counterterrorism efforts. Tom was a finalist in 2007 for the Pulitzer for General Nonfiction for his book on military intervention in Iraq. He is also the author of 7 nonfiction books, mostly on military and national security issues, but not all. One of them, which is for sale here in the library, is First Principles: What America's Founders Learned from the Greeks and Romans and How That Shaped Our Country. Be a very interesting read in these times. In addition to all of the nonfiction work that he does, he is also the author of 4 books of fiction, 3 of which make up the Ryan Tapia series. The first book in the series is Everybody Knows But You. The book is a crime story based locally and introduces Ryan Tapia, who is at that point is an FBI agent working out of the Bangor office. It has lots of references to local places and communities, and it is really an interesting and fun read because it is so local. The second book in the series is We Can't Save You. The narrative focuses on a group of Native Americans who are protesting climate change. Both the FBI and the White House get involved, and Ryan ends up fired from the FBI because his sympathies change. Now tonight, Tom will be talking about his newest book, Big Money, Small Town. This is a story about a small town in Maine that has valuable mineral assets nearby. Some of the townspeople are getting sick and there's a growing sentiment to control global mining. But at that point, money, power, politics, and corruption get involved, and you can imagine what happens after that. Tom will be in conversation tonight with Lincoln Millstein. Lincoln is also a journalist who worked at the Hartford Courant, the Boston Globe, the New York Times. He was a senior executive at Hearst Corporation, and he is now focused on very local news. Many of us know him as the creator and author of the Quietside Journal. And I believe it's probably no coincidence that the editor of the local newspaper in the most recent book, Big Money, Small Town, is named Lincoln, right? So please join me in welcoming Tom and Lincoln.
Thank you. I just want to say that I'm glad that somebody called that salute to Lincoln. Lincoln is doing something unique here, which is bringing big city journalism to a small town. And I don't think Bar Harbor knows what hit it. I thought his column today was a good example of accountability journalism, of saying, hey, some people said this, but they did something else. Some people, public officials have been wrong. It's all names, it's all on the record. It's just good, solid journalism. And
thank you.
It's nice to see it happen.
Thank you very much. Just want to warn you, there's some Bar Harbor people here, and they play hardball. I mean, we call this the quiet side for a reason.
I also threw in the cruise ships in the book.
Which is my favorite line in the book, about an evil lobbyist who got exposed, and then she couldn't get any more work. And my favorite line is, even the cruise ship people won't return her call.
You know, I used to pull lobsters on a recreational license, and it amazes me the cruise ships can discharge their sewage in the lobster zone. I mean, if you think Maine lobstermen are powerful, they're not powerful enough to stop that shit.
So, as you can already tell, we're gonna have a rollicking time.
This was my favorite talk of all I gave last year, the one with Lincoln.
So we did this last year, and it's like that movie, same time next year.
Yep.
I wanted to start off by saying, some of you haven't read the book, so I want to be careful that I'm not giving away too much. So I'm going to let you first kind of describe the book before we get to that. I mean, you're a really interesting character, and your background is interesting. You went to school in Kabul.
For 2 years, yeah.
And why were you in Kabul?
Because
how old were you?
I was 13, 14, 15. My father was a professor at Columbia University in the late 60s. And like a lot of people in the middle, the students thought he sided with the administration thought he sided with the students. He said, screw the lot of you. I'm running the overseas program for Columbia. I'm taking the next slot that opens up. Well, the next slot was Uganda, but then Idi Amin said he didn't want any more American professors coming. So my father said, well, I'll take the next slot, which turned out to be Kabul, Afghanistan. So off we went in 1969. My parents kind of overwhelmed by the 60s by having 6 kids, by having my older brother become a motorcycle freak in Afghanistan. Didn't pay a lot of attention to me. And I just say to my parents, like, I'm going to the shower for the weekend down to Pakistan, because it was the nearest English language bookstore. And I'd say, give me $200, 100 for books and 100 for the trip. And off I'd go, age of 14.
So get this. He comes back to the States and he goes to Scarsdale High School. Right. And then of course you went to Yale. And I knew a lot of Yaleys at that time because I'm around the same age and went to school around the same time. But the Yale graduates I knew who didn't go to law school and who didn't go to medical school did one of two things. They either went to work for the CIA or they became journalists.
Yeah. That goes back to the World War II. Norman Holmes Pearson, who was a professor of poetry at Yale, and later edited with W.H. Auden, a very good anthology of English language poetry. He served with the CIA, and also James Angleton, who was head of CIA counterintelligence and probably really did a lot of damage to the CIA by suspecting everybody was a Russian spy, except the one guy who was, Kim Philby, his best friend. There was a real Yale English department CIA connection. So you either went into journalism or CIA.
Well, Downey, who got shot down on the spy plane, wasn't he a Yalie?
Probably.
Yeah. So as you can see, I got to be sure I apply some discipline here because we could go all over the place today.
And there will be questions later on. And before I forget it, there are books for sale, and you can go get them now if you don't want to stand in line. I've signed about 20 of them if anybody just wants to run over there and grab them.
So I wanted to know, given the background we just described, how did you come to? What was your experience in Maine as a young person? How did you come to know Maine?
First time I was ever in Maine is one of my brother's teachers invited my family of 6 kids and 2 kind of frazzled, crazy adults, invited us to her house in Maine. She must have been a saint. I mean, to have these little kids running around. So we came up for that, and I loved Maine. And then when I was in college, I worked as a timber marker up in Ashland, Maine, doing the environment. It's called the LURC lines, Land Use Regulation Commission lines, keeping the cutters away from streams and rivers, and making sure they weren't cutting wood they're not supposed to cut, various things, making sure they were going after the spruce and fir, basically. But I spent a lot of time at T7R5, an unpopulated township in northern Maine, unpopulated except for several billion black flies. I remember reaching up behind my ear one day and pulling out a wad of bloody insects. I gave blood. But I loved working up there. I loved the Maine woods. And I spent a good part of my college years in love with 2 different blondes from Maine named Sarah. So there were incentives to the program too.
So I don't want to give away too much of the book. So why don't I let you talk about, describe it a little bit with whatever you're comfortable in talking about.
I came late to writing mysteries. It's only for entertainment the last few years. Graham Greene called some of his novels entertainments. And I came to appreciate that work because I really enjoy writing them. It's fun to write. So I was going back and reading some stuff and I read a lot of Ross MacDonald, who, by the way, did a PhD in Coleridge before becoming a mystery novelist. And then I reread a lot of Dashiell Hammett, especially his novel, Red Harvest. And I was reading Hammett and I thought, why aren't there ideological mysteries now? Ross MacDonald writes about how money perverts people, but doesn't really write about it in a systematic way, the way that Dashiell Hammett does. Hammett kind of writes a critique of the system in the course of his book. So I thought, I'm going to try my hand at that. What would Hammett write about now? He'd write about the American oligarchy. 10 years ago, oligarchy was an obscure word. Now it's on bumper stickers. Everybody knows basically that we live in an oligarchy now, which is rich people calling the shots and running it. The very rich people, the 1/10 of 1%. Half of all the money in the last presidential election was donated by one person, Elon Musk. More money is spent on Maine Senate campaigns. More money comes from outside the state than comes from inside the state. I'm not sure we have a democracy anymore because the dollar outweighs the vote. So I wanted to write about, instead of a book about sort of nationally, I wanted to say, let's look at the oligarchy in one place, one small town. And Maine is kind of fun because Maine is pretty resistant. Maine has a very egalitarian streak in it, a sense that everybody has a right to stand up and speak at the town meeting. But even Maine can be crushed, as we see in this book, by big money that really no longer plays by the rules. This grew out of a conversation I had in my backyard one day with a climate expert who said, if it's below 10 million, the rich don't care. And you can get justice if the issues are below 10 million. He said above 10 million and really above 100 million, justice no longer exists. He said one rich person will win or another rich person will win, but justice will not be done. So I wanted to write about how that sort of seeps through and poisons a society. I was just reading in the New York Times, yesterday's New York Times had an essay about how oligarchies are inherently unstable. So we're living in an increasingly unstable environment. People are sensing the system no longer works for them, it works against them, and that big money plays by its own rules. This is why at the end of the book I have a character say, you think power means being able to do things and make people do things. Power is the ability to break the law and know you can get away with it. And that's the country we live in now, that I tried to portray in a story of normal people experiencing this breakdown.
So the book is about, and I'm not disclosing anything that's already not in the press release. It's about a small town in Maine where a mineral company comes and mines cobalt. And in the process, which leads to pollution and a lot of other issues. There's actually a town, and you know this, in Maine, a very small town with only 400 people in southwestern Maine called Newry, that 5 years ago they discovered had a lot of lithium. And in fact, they valued it at 1.5 billion. So in actuality, we have an example of that. But Maine has fairly strict regulations about mining anything. And for now they're saying we're not going to touch that. But then again, who knows, right? And so that's the backdrop. Now, cobalt, I think there's a big mining operation in the Congo, isn't it?
Yeah, this actually grew out about 2 years ago. I was on the nominating committee for the Pulitzer Prize for nonfiction, which I'm never going to do again. Anybody in the world can nominate themselves for the Pulitzer Prize. And so my favorite was the guy who nominated himself for a Pulitzer Prize for his history of pickleball, in which the names have been changed to protect the guilty. We actually talked about the Pulitzer Prize for pickleball. There should be a special category. But there was a very good book that became a real advocate of in our discussions. I think it was called Red Cobalt. I thank it in the acknowledgments. Most of the cobalt in the world comes out of southeastern Congo, is mined there in really horrific conditions of essentially indentured slavery. And then the cobalt shipped to China for refining and turned into batteries, basically. Using cobalt greatly reduces the danger of fire in batteries for cars and cell phones. So the price to them of getting those batteries is a really horrific situation in the Congo. That is, I think, as bad as anything that happened there with the Belgians in the 19th century. And mining is such an extractive thing. But it also, in the back of my mind, I kept on thinking about data mining in Silicon Valley. Data mining is based upon extracting information from humans. All of us, anything you get that's free, any app you get that's free, you're the product. They are mining you. And that's kind of a theme I wanted to work with.
So this is the third book in a series about Ryan Tapia. who is a wonderful character.
Really, I find him kind of dead to me. He kind of inert. To me, the real character is Maine. Maine's culture, the state. Maine is such a different place from the rest of the country. You forget how different it is. But I find he's almost just a vehicle.
Well, he is a vehicle, but that's what makes him interesting to me, because he's so unlike Maine. He's clearly a foreign character.
Well, that's Ryan is a head nod to Irish Catholic origins. Tapia is a head nod to Hispanic origins. He grows up in suburban Southern California, which I kind of think of as Steven Spielberg, E.T. Everybody just moved there in the last 10 years. Whereas in Maine, people live on coves named for their family 300 years ago.
So I've obviously read all three books. The first one is a more traditional crime novel, and this is where FBI agent Ryan Tapia had his first assignment in an island south of here, you got dead bodies but in every one of the books, I can tell that you are mining, okay, your expertise in certain areas. For instance, in your second book, you know a lot about the civil rights movement, and you know a lot about the Native peoples in Maine. And so you married that knowledge. And so what we get is not a traditional crime novel. You said so yourself. Where your agent actually told you, can you please, what did she say?
My it'll be more dead bodies in the next one.
And she said, could you please pay a little homage to the genre?
Oh, please defer to the genre. Yes.
But that's what made the book interesting to me, because of your detour. And, you had a civil rights basically march by Native American people across the state of Maine. Anyway, but
at the end, they're chased the Canadian border, just like the U.S. Army chased the Nez Perce Indians under Chief Joseph.
Amazing. Yes.
They were it's always struck me. They chased the Indians through a national park. Yellowstone National Park was there in the 1870s. And the Indians went through it, and tourists were watching them as the army's riding after them. Just bizarre.
And then, of course, this latest book, the characters are so familiar to me.
The town manager as the hero, or the tragedy.
And then you went through the select boards were very familiar to me. And
the newspaper editor should have been familiar too.
Yes, I like the newspaper editor a lot, and the reporter. So anyway, he references a lot of familiar characters that you will recognize in these books. In your first book, you talked about a town where the person running for the select board, all they had to do was put out a sign that said, "I was born here." That was the only, right.
Trenton native, I believe, was the inspiration for that.
No, it was actually Tremont.
Oh, Tremont, I'm sorry, yeah.
Right. And I actually published the sign, right? Again, I'm going to take a little bit of a detour, but his civil rights book, in which he basically said the civil rights movement had a war strategy, right? And so that was my favorite book, and
mine too, by the way. It's of all my books, it's sold the least, called "Waging a Good War." I think it is my best book. It's the summary of everything I've learned in 70 years on the planet. You could not sell that book. I couldn't give it away, but it marches along, and I get these impassioned letters from people who've stumbled across it. A labor organizer in LA wrote to me. He's organizing the hotel and restaurant workers. And he said he was so inspired by the book, by the way the civil rights leaders thought through the messages they would send and how to send them. He said he figured out the hotel owners were hotel management was so afraid of a wildcat strike. All he had to do was put portable toilets out in front of the hotel, and the management, oh my God, they're going to do a wildcat strike today out in front of the hotel, and they'd call them up and say, "We'll have an agreement now." He said portable toilets really send a message.
Hopefully you're full of shit.
Unfortunately, I didn't read any of the books. I actually listened to them. And so I have an 8 to 9 hour drive to my house in Connecticut. And this is, and the problem with listening to books is your retention really goes down. Okay. So in the civil rights book, you had a lot of names, and I
Yeah.
can't tell you, I probably retained maybe 3, right? That's okay. But it
The
was,
ones to retain are Diane Nash, James Bevel, and Martin Luther King.
yes, yes.
Diane Nash should be on postage stamps. Brilliant woman.
Anyway, I can read endlessly about the civil rights movement, just as I can about the Vietnam War, because that was my era, and I have a lot of, real person memories of that. Let's go back to this book for a second. I want to ask you this question. So we live in a society and we live in a country that has very strict rules about things like mining, and strict rules about how we extract strategic minerals. Okay. Whereas there are no rules in China. There are no rules in the Congo, right? Are we at a disadvantage strategically, where we have such strict rules about our own resources versus other countries that China's already way ahead of us on the strategic minerals that they can extract. And it's a huge advantage for them right now as we speak. And they're using that advantage. So, is our society, are our rules in a future where this stuff is becoming so important, and we're not able to extract as much of it as we like? What do you think of that?
I think strategic minerals are really important. I think they're too important to be left to the market. If you have the word strategic in front of anything, that by definition means it's really important to our nation, to our society, which means to me that the market cannot be left to run it. Especially a corrupt, politicized market like China has, where you need to have the Communist Party get its share, so Communist Party officials will let things go forward. I think our system in the long run looks better. It's not as exploitative. It's becoming more exploitative. It's becoming more tolerant of inequality. But China has vastly greater inequality, income inequality, and a much messier system. It really does create a mess of human beings and of the environment. I think our system ultimately works better, but strategic minerals need government oversight and transparency. Right now, what you're getting is the Trump kids are getting basically a Chinese-like share of strategic mineral mining overseas, and I think probably increasingly at home. The market also is better when you have a free market of ideas, and informed government regulation is much better at finding alternatives. So a mineral, a rare earth that may seem essential today may not seem essential tomorrow, because the system will find other things. We saw this during the oil crisis in the 1970s. Suddenly, people developed alternatives, developed efficiencies, developed workarounds. And the price of oil actually ultimately goes way down. I remember when oil would actually had a negative price briefly a couple of years ago, about 8 years ago. But actually people were paying people to take the oil off their hands. So I don't think China is a model for the way we should do it. In fact, the lessons of China to me are figure out what they're doing and do the opposite.
Well, but timing has a lot of influence on that. So this little town with 400 people in Newry, Maine, is sitting on $1.5 billion worth of lithium. That's untouchable because we have strict rules about that. Why can't the federal government pass a law and saying that because it's so important to the country, a future, we're not going to allow the state of Maine to interfere with, let's just, eminent domain, for instance. Let's just say we have the power to extract it. I can't imagine in China they would care about a little town with 400 people.
No, they wouldn't.
I couldn't.
They would steamroll it.
Right.
But
And
I don't think that's a recommendation that that's what we should do. Also, if the lithium is that valuable, it might be worth twice as much in 10 years. I actually I've really become a fan of the federal system in the last 10 years. The fact that federal government can't run elections, I couldn't figure out why. The fact that states run elections. This has been it's an obscure part of the Constitution that turns out in the last couple of years, it's been 10 years, it's been essential. It's the one thing that has prevented Donald Trump from destroying even more of the country. So there's a saying among economists that regulations often point the way. They pay for themselves in the long run by creating a better environment. But you've got to have transparency, and you've got to not have a corrupt executive branch, which is what we have right now.
well, I'm certainly not advocating passing of eminent domain law to destroy Newry, Maine, but I have to ask the question, so right now we have an appetite for these minerals, just like every other first world country, and to power our cars, to power everything that we have an ambition to dominate. So what do? We end up buying cobalt from the Congo. So aren't we destroying the Congo in the right way?
The world is destroying southeastern Congo right now, and I think it's a tragedy. But the world collectively has decided that's a price we're willing to pay. I would hate to see Eric Trump and Donald Trump Jr. descend on Maine, rubbing their little hands, passing out $100 bills.
I would hate that too.
So they could, rip the lithium out of the ground. These are not people I would think of as stewards of the American interest.
I want to go back to the book again. Ryan Tapia, whom I like better than you do.
Mm-hmm.
He's a thoughtful person.
He's a learner.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Are there more books with Ryan Tapia?
There is the next one, but in it, Tapia gets a little bit older.
Okay.
The next one begins with basically U.S. government kidnapping him.
Oh,
and saying, well, you got to work for us now.
Oh, he's giving us
And he ends
inside information.
and two young women, one a Marine Corps medic, and one a disillusioned CIA analyst. Actually kind of take him under, he's supposed to be running them, but this is like me and my daughter within a week, she's running everything. So in the next one is kind of a transition to these two other characters, Celie and Spike, who kind of take over the story.
So you've already started that.
Yeah, and it's funny, the four big things that pissed off Tom Ricks: income inequality, global overheating, uh, and the oligarchs. Yeah, and the disrespect for civil rights movement, and finally, specifically, the war on the Black Panthers in the 1960s, which I don't think ever has been fully understood in this country. My research indicates to me that at least 600 Black Panthers were killed or unfairly imprisoned. A lot of them murdered by SWAT teams, which basically were created in response to the Black Panthers. And the FBI does this kind of working through, this is not fiction, this is what happened, working with local police departments and conducts raid after raid. Chicago is the most famous one. And that novel is about sort of, they're trying to, some part of the US government is trying to figure out what happened, and another part is trying to cover it up. And Ryan and these two women find themselves in the middle of that.
Will that book be out by next year so we can meet at the same time?
Probably not. The funny thing is my editor doesn't like it. She won't tell me why. It's the first time this has happened to me.
Her father was involved.
It's funny because her father is a US government official, but he's in the Labor Department, supposedly.
I saw a device that you used in this book, which I could see how Tapia would come back. You okay, I won't, you don't want me to discuss, okay, I won't.
We spoke about.
Yes,
it.
yes.
What's the next book? And
Yes.
what time is the
Yes.
time? We both had our own theories.
Yes.
I want to see, one thing you don't see in detective novels or mysteries is the protagonist aging. And I'm fascinated by aging. I find I'm 70 and there's so much that goes on in aging. It's almost like a second adolescence. That I felt like I'd like to play with that. And so I do kind of want to work with that. And these two young women in their 20s, who basically just take over his life. You know, they end up putting him in the back seat of the rental car, and they just call him Dad. You know, oh, Dad's grumbling again. You know?
Well, Olive Kittredge aged
Mm-hmm.
in that book, but she didn't change.
I thought she did a little
A
bit.
little bit at the end, yes, a little bit at the end.
I love that book. I think Elizabeth Strout is just a terrific.
She's a great Maine
terrific. Yeah.
name. I'm so happy to.
It's funny. I just drove past. I noticed that driving down Kitteridge Brook or something. Yeah. And I wondered where did Elizabeth Strout lives in Brunswick.
Kittredge is in Bar Harbor for years.
Yeah, that's a marvelous book. A friend once asked me, he said, "You live in Maine. Have you read Olive Kittredge?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Do Mainers understand how crazy she is?" And I said, "No, they think her husband, the pharmacist, is crazy because he's so optimistic. Mainers think Olive Kittredge is right." There's an earlier novel by her.
Yeah.
Name's escaping me.
A man?
That's what you said.
Abide with me. Abide with me. And one of the characters in the novel is the Maine light winter. And I just love that.
I'm going to take a little bit of a left turn, then I'm going to open it up to questions. The left turn is I want to talk about your book on Iraq. And I read a review about it, and I didn't read that book, but the reviewer said in it, you posited that the big mistake we made in going to Iraq was how we indiscriminately killed so many people, and thereby turning the civilian population against us. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I wonder if we're we repeat ourselves over and over. And so, here we go and we bomb the hell out of Iran, and are we turning the citizenry against us similarly?
Probably, I mean, Iran's population was the most pro-American population in the Middle East. The population, not the government. But I think Iranians are seeing right now, I mean, we have created a more hardline regime there. We've empowered the IRGC, the Islamic, what they called, Revolutionary Guard. Ir- Iran is in many ways a natural ally that we've done everything possible to alienate. It makes me sick.
Okay, one follow-up, and that is, what is the state of our intelligence uh uh
Intelligence.
right now? Because intelligence is so important, right?
Mhm.
What is the state of the CIA? I mean, Trump is he's so fearful of what he calls the deep state that he's essentially fired many of our intelligence officers. And what do you think? What do you think? What do you think is going on there?
What amazes me is that Trump has not done a single thing that would displease Vladimir Putin.
Uh-huh.
He has wrecked the American intelligence establishment. He has alienated our closest allies. My wife and I went on vacation in Nova Scotia last year. I was stunned. Just at the reason we went to Nova Scotia, by the way, is my son and his wife refused to come to America. They live in Barcelona, and his wife is Catalan Spanish. She said, "I'm not bringing my cell phone to America."
Yeah.
You know, they'll go through it like the Chinese government goes through, downloads all your phone numbers, and then matches them up with every other phone number in the database. She's a Catalan separatist, and suddenly they're going to have all these people plugged into the Catalan separatist networks. So in Halifax, Nova Scotia, there was a billboard for a grocery store, and it said, "Our prices are more stable than some world leaders."
Yeah.
You go into the liquor store and there's no American wine for sale. I mean, they are really angry in Canada, who never expected, to be treated this way. It's just the way Trump has handled Ukraine is such a shame. Um, he has sided again and again with authoritarians, fascists, and has made Putin happy every day. And Putin is a genuine stone cold killer thug. They toss opponents out the window. They kill their opponents routinely. They take dissidents and they poison them. And this is someone who Trump cozies up to. It amazes me that the American people have tolerated this.
Well, after the game tonight, we're not going to be able to go to Belgium, so let's take some questions. There's one right there. Speak into the mic.
You're a little bit close. Okay, so with everything you discussed this afternoon, why do you think SCOTUS and our appellate courts and many of our state courts are impotent with regard to what Trump has been doing, what other countries are complaining about? How do you see that branch of our government caving to the other two?
Well, I think the judiciary has stood up more than the executive, of course, or the legislative branches. And the states have stood up again and again. But, I have a friend in Minneapolis who said they genuinely felt like an occupied city last winter. Citizens were murdered in the streets. And there has been no justice that we know of in bringing the murderers to account. So I think the judiciary, though, has generally done better. The problem is, we live in an oligarchy in which people basically decided about 40 years ago that they were going to change the Supreme Court, and they did. And we now have a Supreme Court that's wildly out of touch with where the American people are. It'll swing back, but this is the worst Supreme Court since Roger Taney and the Dred Scott decision. It just amazes me that we're living through this. I never expected it.
So I'm listening to your first book and
You know,
audio.
the first of the fictions.
First of, yeah,
Yeah.
the first Ryan book. And did you run your discussion of local people through local people, in the way you describe the fishermen, the way they speak, their habits, with their boats and where they tie up and someone using their fishing area? I found a lot of it I knew because I have a lobsterman cousin, but I was just curious if the local people read that, would they be enraged, or would they agree with about everything you talked about?
But my state legislature said, boy, you really captured the culture. It just reflects years of sitting around drinking beers with guys. I belong to a group on Deer Isle called the Choir Practice. We were all the choir boys. And
People from away, or
it was a mix. It was a mix, including one guy. The annual parade, July 4th parade. I said, hey, next year we could do salute to PFAs, people from away. And he said, yeah. And he said, and I'd stand on the side of the road and throw shit at you. It's kind of what the attitude was. What there was a lot of discussion about who was based on what. And I told them there's only one person that everybody knows but you who's actually based entirely on a real character, which is Demetrius the mechanic. He appears as Plato the mechanic. He's very proud. After that, he fixed my car overnight every time. He said, you put me in your book. No other person is really based on somebody, but nobody believes me when I tell them that. They're still trying to figure out, because there is one street where the drug dealers live. And that is described in the book. But, it also reflects a conversation. Hey, I provide a service like everybody else. Lobstermen are out there, and they want those painkillers and they can't fish without them. I remember a tugboat captain I know saying, he said, heroin follows the fishing fleet and always has and always will.
I mean, I don't think I need this, but I, like you, I'm 70 years old. I have a son whose family lives in Amsterdam. They will not come to the United States.
I recommend Nova Scotia. There are direct flights to St. John's from all over.
Well, we visit them. That's what we have to do. And you've listed a lot of the atrocities that take place on a daily basis already. People are dying in ICE custody, people been killed in Minneapolis.
My daughter, the one who basically takes over things, is an ICE watcher in Washington, D.C., which requires a real courage because, ICE beats these people up. She's pregnant.
Oh, wow.
And I keep on worrying that,
You should be careful.
yeah.
Well, my wife and I live in Washington when we're not luckily here. So we get lots of questions from people about what it's like to live in Washington these days, but I won't go into that. But my question to you is, why don't you think there's been a greater pushback to what's happening? I mean, people marched against the Vietnam War. People marched against the war on, poverty. People marched in favor of civil rights. The level of corruption is unmatched in history. What's it going to take to get people into the streets? The upset of the midterms? What do you think? I'm curious.
I think we are at an unprecedented point in American history. That since the Reagan years,
Yes.
basically, the middle class is flatlined. the middle class has seen no addition in wealth. All new wealth in this country is going to the top 1/10 of 1%.
Yeah.
And nobody kind of knows, what do you do in that situation? We live in an oligarchy. The super rich are running the country for their own purposes, and they're squishing the rest of the country. Every It's an unprecedented problem. And it's funny, it goes all against the ideals of the founding fathers. John Adams said, we don't want anybody to be too poor or too rich. It really was focused on creating a strong, literate, well-educated middle class. And they saw that as really what you wanted to have this country built on. It's since the Reagan years and since the tech revolution, the digital revolution, that's all been smashed. I'm not calling up.
Yeah, he's got the mic here. Here's,
In addition to the major role in the second novel of indigenous peoples, there was a smaller, but to my mind, very powerful moment in your third novel involving indigenous peoples and Ryan. Could you comment on how you see the future of indigenous peoples in the country?
Is this that moment where they sit at the picnic table and have that conversation? I just think that Native Americans, or I prefer the term First Peoples, because actually there are groups of Indians who object to the term Native Americans. We're not Americans, nor are we original to this land. They just got here 10,000 years before anybody else. I do think that Native Americans have a culture that in some ways is built for handling climate change better than American capitalist culture. American capitalist culture is, to me right now, in terms of global warming, global overheating, it's a Ferrari without a steering wheel. It's going very fast. It's a powerful economy, but it's not being steered well. And at some point, you're going to say, overheating is undeniable and more needs to be done. And a purely unfettered capitalist system cannot respond adequately. There are greater goods for a society than profit. Profit should not be the sole measure of what a society does. And we should step outside that and lessen market control of everything we do. And we should also tax rich people.
I have a question that is really about something that you were just talking about. Someone asked of your reaction to the way that things are going right now. Of course, all of us have seen a lot about this in recent weeks and months. US is clearly kind of on a downslide. What I would just suggest and get your reaction to goes to this. People like to, I think, talk about all of these current conditions in the US, like the fact that rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. But I'm wondering if you could entertain a different thesis, which is that the real source of decline right now has to be internal. It's psychological. In other words, that if you look way back to like a small city state like Athens, at one point they were sort of on top of the world, but they went down very quickly. And it was basically within like a lifetime that they went from being the sort of cultural intellectual capital of Western Europe to being a state that was kind of overrun by startup, a bunch of jobs, just had nothing but a military state. Why is there any reason to think that the US isn't going through a similar kind of process only more dragged out and on a bigger scale. In other words, rather than just looking at external conditions like the rich getting richer, is the real problem in some way with the middle class, with most of the most of the people who occupy the country, rather than with what's happening to the Supreme Court and all of these things.
Well, I think all those things we're talking about are consequences of that decline. Clearly, there is a mental state that is not working. This goes back to the key concerns of the founding fathers, to an amazing amount. Their discussion was what caused the decline of the Roman Republic? How did they lose hold of a republic and become an imperial monarchy and everything but men? Madison spent, before the Constitutional Convention, James Madison spent about 9 years trying to answer that question. He had Thomas Jefferson in Paris literally shipping him box loads of books in French and Greek and Latin. He was searching for what caused decline. And their answer was essentially people lost hold of virtue. It's a hard thing. But Madison's answer to this, and that the one that the country endorsed and wrote into law, was the Constitution. The difference between us and Rome, he ultimately said, is we have their example of decline. And we're going to write a constitution that has resiliency written into it. That says you don't want too much power concentrated. So let's disperse power again and again. Let's have 3 different branches of the federal government. Within the legislative branch, have 2 houses that in many ways oppose each other. Let's have a judiciary that can review the actions of the legislature. Let's give an enormous amount of power to the states so they can check and balance the federal system. I mean, it really was all about, we're going to disperse power so much. The only way you're going to move forward is if you're able to make compromises and drive toward the middle. That isn't happening right now. Compromises aren't occurring, and the checking and balancing isn't occurring. So I think the judiciary has done quite a bit of it, but not enough, especially at the Supreme Court level. I think the answer is the constitutional system isn't working right now because we live in an oligarchy. What do you do about it? I don't have a good answer.
Yeah, I mean, just one small comment on this, when Madison was sort of spending all this time researching the reasons for the fall of the Roman Republic, he was also spending a lot of time reading Machiavelli. Machiavelli said, no city-state that's a republic can last forever. It's going to kind of decline for these more psychological reasons. People can't keep up to a certain level. It's almost like a natural law, like a law of physics. And
250 years.
And right, 250 years is a certain amount of time, for the country to kind of stay up at a certain level. So that, I'm wondering, could we say that Madison thinks about the sort of system of checks and balances as the best way to try to slow a decline, but it's not necessarily going to keep it from happening if all the different sort of like people making up the population have got notions they didn't have 30 or 50 years ago, and the notions themselves are sort of getting.
The problem is if the system doesn't work, ultimately you have a revolution, and it's bloody and messy. And I think this is what the oligarchs are just suddenly beginning to think about. Wait a second, people really hate us. The new American villain in the movies is the oligarch, with good reason. And we've got to figure out a way to deal with this. But basically, American politics is now a wholly owned subsidiary of the super wealthy.
The revolution will be bloody.
That's the problem with revolutions. Now, Thomas Jefferson thought that was just great. The blood of the tree of liberty must be watered frequently with the blood of tyrants.
It's not a dinner party.
I have a question from Peter Brooks, who's online. Hi, Tom, I'm a former Marine. And past contributor to Best Defense and Fiasco. I'm also a longtime Little Cranberry summer resident. Great to see you here and to hear your voice. What can we learn from Maine, its people, government, and culture that the rest of the country can learn to help us through this moment?
That's a great question coming from a Cranberry Islander. What Maine has is a couple of things. Respect for the average person, respect for labor. Maine is almost pre-industrial in that way. Maine has a disrespect for the intellectual, the banker. I actually quoted this novel, something a friend of mine said to me once on Deer Isle. He was talking about a neighbor, and he said, you know, he's an investment banker. I guess he just wasn't good for anything else. There's an equality in Maine that I think is in the bones of Maine. Maine has much different. I spent a lot of time in Texas. Maine has almost the opposite laws for land use in Texas. Maine is much more permissive about land use. In Texas, basically, you can shoot anybody who sets a toe on your property without your permission. I'm a kayaker, but I don't like to kayak Texas rivers because cattle ranchers string barbed wire across the streams. And you can just get cut up pretty badly, pretty quick. People don't do that in Maine. I think there's much more respect for the average person here than in the rest of the country. And another thing is Maine does have a respect that goes back, I think, to colonial times, a respect for education. The Maine Library is a state establishment. Every town has a library. And boy, are these libraries well used in the winter. When I was a year-round resident, it was striking to me. I mean, you could announce a talk on an obscure subject, the life of crows, and it would be standing room only. People would come out. My wife once suggested to the library in Brooklyn, Maine, a TV series that they get. They said, sounds good, they wouldn't gut it. Next time they saw her, they said, everybody in town watched that TV series last winter. We know, what else do you recommend? The town library and education for the average person is respected here in a way that I think is not in a lot of places.
I think I have the last question, and this is a little different from what we've been discussing. Most of your career has been focused on serious, weighty issues, and you've been writing nonfiction. And then sometime in the last few years, you switched to fiction. And while the books still address serious issues, the genre is so different. And the constructs of the genre are different. The narrative, plot, character development. What made you make the change in genres? And what's sort of your reaction to writing fiction?
I think what really drove me to it was the decline of the publishing industry. Writing a nonfiction book is a harrowing process because facts are such fragile things. It's so easy to mess up a fact, to mar it, to get it wrong. Just a verb tense change. Like, you know, he is a communist is different from he was a communist. And the process in nonfiction is, you know, the book is edited, then it gets copy edited, then it has a legal review, then it gets printed. In each of those steps, mistakes are inevitably introduced. And as the author, you're spending, you know, a lot of time really just trying to make sure that as little damage is done to it as possible. Whereas in fiction, you can make stuff up. So I was using a lot of reality, but you know, I remember one guy said to me, you know, Tom, the FBI, the feds do not have jurisdiction on murders in national parks. And I said, guess what? In my book, they do. It was convenient. So it's more fun. It's a lot faster. But really, the publishing industry, like the journalism industry, is in a serious financial crunch. And the quality of copy editing was going down. I remember one of my books, I just had to spend a month fixing mistakes introduced by a copy editor. And
Thank you very much.
yeah, I mean, you make, I was amazed, and it was from a publisher that really had a good reputation. And I actually wrote the editor, I said, I have never had a situation like this in previous 8 books. And he said, thank you, this is actually helpful for me in my internal arguments. But it just was no longer worth it to me to write nonfiction. If I were writing nonfiction, the book I wanted to do was a biography of the book Huckleberry Finn. How it was conceived, how it was written, how it was received, how its perception has been changed. The great American novel, a biography.
Catherine, I think that same question in a couple of weeks put to Baker Klein,
Yes.
because historic fiction, I would go as far as say that's its own genre, and to have her talk about the foursome
Yeah.
and her research, there's some things that she can't cheat on some things. And she had to do the research. This is the Siamese twin story. And then
I know from talking to her, that book had to go through a sensitivity editor before the publisher would agree.
right, it had a lot of components where
It's a very.
where she couldn't make up certain things,
Yeah.
but she could make up other things.
Well, this is a really very interesting discussion. Thank you so much, Tom and Lee. Next year with the 4th book. Ryan and I have theories about how it's going to unfold. And several of the books are on sale in the back of the library, so please.
And I'll go and sign them for you if you want.
So we'll
You
meet
can
back
start
there. Thank-
with mine.
Oh,